Hey, Stoney here with another game of Mechabellum, and in this game you'll see two juggernauts fighting, one being a very famous standard player, very defensive, and he's up against a Poochie who is very aggressive. So let's jump right into it. Alright, at the bottom here we have Mr. STEELSANE playing as a cost control specialist, and he's up against a Poochie playing as a fire badger specialist. And the MMR of this game is around 22 to 2300. So STEELSANE is a very strong defensive player. I think he almost exclusively plays defensive or standard. And it's no surprise that he picked the pack with Stormcallers. It's just so good into this type of situation. Poochie is a bit of a wild card. I think he is primarily a more aggro-leaning type of player, but he's one of those players that knows the game so intimately well that he's able to adjust his strategy on the fly. A lot of times, when we see players kind of play into the meta, the Poochie is not one of those players. Like if you watch a lot of Poochie games or on his stream, you'll notice that he kind of plays whatever he feels like because he knows how these type of unit interactions work. And a lot of respect for that, because that's really what a really good player should do, right? I remember when I was a teenager, I think there was a program called Chess Master, right? You go and you study chess, and there was a edition with Josh Waiskin, which is a very young, talented chess grandmaster. And he said that instead of remembering or memorizing the chess openings, which is great, the real great masters understands the function of the individual units. And I think that's very true in both chess and also in Mechabellum. All right, to start off, we have a balanced or symmetrical board here for STEELSANE, but with your Poochie, we're starting off with asymmetrical aggro on the side. And I'm not too surprised, because when you start off with Mustangs and Crawlers, it's not that easy to get things done if you spread them out too thin. These are very fragile units. These are units that don't really do a lot of damage in the early rounds. Like Mustang especially, they cannot even kill a pack of Crawler of the same level reliably in early rounds if the Crawlers are close enough to the Mustang. So this is some of the problems when you're starting with that pack. Like Mustang Crawler is one of the, has been historically one of the worst startup packs, because it's just so difficult to get it going, right? But not saying it's impossible, it's just difficult. So unit drop here, Sabertooth is picked for Poochie, and it's actually picked for both. So Saber Mustang is an actual meta, is sort of a close relative of Fort Mustang. The difference between Saber Mustang and Fort Mustang is just that with Fort Mustang, you always will have that option to do shield, and the shield will prevent the Mustang from getting killed, or from getting sprayed on by fire and that sort of stuff. Whereas the Sabertooth more of a offensive standalone unit. All right, Fire Badger goes down to help with the Sabertooth. Now notice the positioning, especially the distance between the Fire Badger and the Crawlers in this type of positioning. So Poochie deliberately puts the Fire Badger about 2 squares ahead of these Crawlers, knowing that for a couple things. One is knowing these Crawlers will likely run ahead if there's going to be any sort of Sabertooth coming in this way. And so here we have the Crawlers running. Oh, actually the Saber is just a hair closer. But more importantly, that little pocket right there is also signaling a potential switch into forts if he ever wants to. Like the Sabertooth right now, yes, is on the board. It's a very powerful unit. I think it's the only unit that usually answers STEELSANE Sabertooth in case he picked that one. But I don't know if this is going to be a permanent position onto a Poochie's board. Force Stand is extremely powerful. I think according to many high MMR players is one of the most scalable and cost-efficient late game comps, and it covers such a wide variety of situations. If your opponents are running, Vulcan Marksman, Force Stand can win that pretty good. If your opponent is going high explosive Overlords, Force Stand with some shields, with some AA can win that pretty decently. So it's just a very well-rounded type of units. All right, so getting into round 3. So far, there hasn't been a lot of pickups on these reinforcements. So one pickup from STEELSANE, which is a Photon. Actually, they both pick up Photon here onto the Sabertooth. And it's very curious because I feel like the Sabertooth for both players are temporary. They only pick the Sabertooth because they fear that the other player is going to pick the Sabertooth and they will have no answers for it. Alright, range gets picked up by both players on their chaff clearing units. Now, in a straight-up fight, with range Mustangs into range Arclights, I think the Arclight wins every single time, assuming they're in a similar level. However, whenever you have large units in front of the Mustangs, then all of a sudden your Mustangs do so much better than your Arclights because of the sheer number of units per squad and their ability to scale a little bit smoother compared to Arclights. Like Arclights into chaff clear, you don't really need to level them too much because they usually one-shot the chaff anyways, which means there's not a lot of scale options. A level 5 Arclight kills a pack of crawler just as quickly as a level 1 Arclight, whereas Mustang, a level 5 Mustang, will kill a pack of crawler 5 times faster than a level 1 Mustang, so there's a lot of potential with that kind of play. Alright, lots of crawlers. Now, one thing to be concerned about is that eventually when you have so many crawlers down the line, your Arclights may not be sufficient to clear them up fast enough. And if the goal is for you to get rid of them fast enough so your big units can hit your opponent's big units, then you really need to either figure out a more efficient chaff clear, either in the form of Vulcan or Wraith, or even Typhoon sometimes with Mech Rage can clear things pretty well. Or you need to win the chaff war by just having more chaff. So in this particular situation, right, you notice that STEELSANE's Sabertooth actually got killed fairly early, whereas the Poochie Sabertooth stayed all the way to the end. All right, round 4 reinforcement. Underground is always an ever-present threat, especially for a ASIM aggro type of position. You can always have underground back here, steel balls up here, so you will just draw everything over, and then the steel ball goes in and take tower. So it's always like a cheeky move that you can do when you're playing into aggro. Well, Poochie, not so much. So there's not going to be any pickup again on the reinforcements. Oh, actually, no, there is going to be underground. Just the window disappeared on me a little earlier. So it's going to be double underground here. Poochie's underground is not going to be as effective if it's not planning on capitalizing it. Now, underground does spawn, I think, more than 2 squads of crawlers. So if you know the answer, please comment below. But I think it's around 2 squads of crawlers, and they can defeat, a single squad of crawlers here. Replicate is taken. I'm surprised it's Replicate. I think Replicate gives you a greater tempo, but is also more expensive. You could have just spent 150 on Drill, and that will counter Replicate. And it's a lot cheaper because Replicate is actually 250, so you want to save that money. But I get it. If you're using Replicate and your opponent doesn't, you're going to cause a whole lot of problems in this particular round. But next turn, your opponent is just going to counter with the cheaper technology. All right, so let's see here. All right, the replicating crawlers is doing well in the back end. It's gonna get tower, but unfortunately the front end has been pretty much completely demolished. So there's really nothing to capitalize on the tower capture much. I feel like STEELSANE would have probably won that round without the underground and the replicate. Simply because of the oil and the fire. I think that was a pretty smart move. Double Scorpion is always interesting. And when you're on the line, a single Wraith. Let's see here. Single Wraith might actually be pretty good here for, well, both players. But Scorpion also serves kind of the halfway point between a Sabertooth and a Fortress. Then you can put Scorpion here and you can get that additional damage. So Phoenix is picked up for Pucci. I think he's more concerned about the big Wraith. A level 3 Wraith can reliably tank from these two Mustangs and even that single Marksman. So getting that additional Phoenix is a great answer against that. Everything else, I think Pucci's board is already pretty good in. Surprisingly, he also took Replicate instead of getting Drill. I think he's just a little concerned about just being outscaled with double tap. But for now, though, it's just tech matching. His flank is not going to survive for that long, but I don't think Pucci will sell this particular flank. The purpose of this flank is to delay specifically this pack of crawlers, pulling that over to the side and removing an additional chaff to support these units at the front. Because the crawler right here, they're going to die in like the first 2 seconds. And once it's dead, all there's left to contest with these Fire Badgers and the Sabertooth that used to be there, with just these 2 units. So they're not very useful. There it goes. So the Sabertooth is gone and replaced by a bigger, better Sabertooth, which is the Fortress. And here's the chaff problem. As you can see, yes, you know, this flank is probably not going to kill everything, but by the time this flank finally turns over, the Sabertooth is already being targeted. So by the time this flank actually gets to the fighting range, the Sabertooth is dead and it's just left over for some chaff clear. Now, Pucci does need to worry about the Stormcallers now are level 2. One is that they actually did quite a lot in clearing out some of these Mustangs, and then 2 is that because they're level 2, they can actually do a lot of damage to big units like forts. Alright, an excellent defense so far from STEELSANE, barely taking any damage to his HP. Mobilized Battleship and Bombard both could be very good. I think Bombard is, in terms of cost efficiency, is very good here for STEELSANE. Alright, Bombard is taken by both sides. When you're playing aggro or asim aggro, with lots of Mustangs and lots of crawlers, just putting a Bombard here is just amazing. Because you can't really shield them too much, as your unit tend to move forward. Whereas for STEELSANE, yes, the Bombard could be very good, but you can also just push Shield Bubble down and survive the first couple rounds of that Bombard. Alright, forts are now with shield to protect these Mustangs. This fort, slightly misplaced. I thought it would be better right here behind the Fire Badgers because it gives these Mustangs a bit more cover. And also having forts on the side like this, making you a little bit more susceptible for a longer distraction. I imagine if you put vertical crawlers right here, and your fort will be distracted for a little bit. Alright, Pucci's opening up a new line of attack on the far right. And this is an option that asymmetrical aggro players have. When they feel like they're losing on that side, or if they're winning on that side, they can always divert resources and create like a very strong push. Usually comes with a mobile beacon strafe to the tower. And that way you can use the other side to help win your opposite. Okay, Bombard coming down. So far, these forts are at the risk of outscaling STEELSANE. That is just because right now the answer for these forts are these melting points, and melting points are being outnumbered. And not to mention we have these high-level phoenixes which really pack a punch on this melting point. Ooh, very unfortunate. This fort is almost dead, but because it isn't, it's going to do 350 damage. Assault Fort, I think, is a great card here. And then Advanced Power System is also pretty good if you're going to aggro. So both are great cards here for Poochie. I probably will consider Assault Fort. You get the same movement bonus as the Advanced Power System, and then you get that additional HP. Now you do have to worry about the range war because you have Melting Point. So let's do some math here. If you do take Assault Fort, it has a... Oop. I was going to say, I think it has like a range decrease by like 20. So if you take range increase, you end up with 120, 155. Your Mustang's at 135. So, okay, maybe not. So with the Assault Fort, your Mustangs will actually shoot always behind your fortress, which means your fortress gets targeted by Melting Point. In the later rounds, one thing you want to keep your fortress is just take range, which gets a bump to 140, and your Mustangs at 135, which means at some point your Mustangs will stand in front of the fortress and shoot the Melting Point, and that's where the Mustangs become very useful. Alright, so it's going to be advanced power, so this just means everything moves faster, and this is required when you're running into melting points with fortress because of that difference. It's 15 meters, but it is still, for a unit that walks very slow, used to be 6 meters per second. That's almost 3 seconds, and 3 seconds is enough for a melting point to charge up and kill in the next 2. Alright, more melting point, and now we're catching up in numbers as far as melting point goes. Ooh, the level 2 fortress gets instant targeted, which means Poochie will really need to have consider range on the fortress next round. Alright, things are falling on the far right. This turn, STEELSANE is got a oil on the ground to help with the chaff clear, and he's not going to do the same the next round. And of course, next round with range on the fortress, these melting points are even more susceptible of being destroyed. Now it comes down to a game of numbers. Is there going to be enough chaff clear? Is there going to be enough melting points? Alright. Round 8. Reinforcement cards. None of this really stand out. I think Wall Swamp can be somewhat of a distraction whenever you're running melting points. And your ground chaff clear is already excellent. So having some sort of air chaff is really distracting. So Wall Swamp is taken for STEELSANE, but I think it might be taken for a Poochie as well. There it is. It just makes good sense. For STEELSANE, it makes less sense because of the Mustangs. But I think he's just trying to do something cheeky because Underground is also off cooldown. So both players are thinking of the same thing. In terms of this sort of setup, I think a Poochie is going to be a lot more effective. Especially where this Arclight probably just dies in like the first couple shots. Didn't notice the double tech taking on his crawlers. Double tech is a smart move when you have crawlers on the line because they actually get to use both the techs. But if you're using crawlers mostly for just late traffic, it doesn't matter. You don't really need to get that double tech. Another reason why Poochie took double tech, I think he was more concerned about STEELSANE doing that double tap to him as well. But at this point, I mean, he doesn't really have a lot of flank. About the only unit that's really there is here. They're getting into in the first second. Everything else, I think it's okay. But maybe, here's the thought, right? The reason that Poochie took double tag is because the underground is off cooldown and he really wants to win the underground fight. And if he does win the underground fight, looking at the HP here, not enough to kill STEELSANE, but going to do a significant amount of damage. Alright, EM is taken on the melting point. Very useful in popping the initial shield. But again, problem right now. Big problem on the far right. We have a Poochie with the double tech breaking through. Paying off in a big way. And it's also allowing the fortress to gain some levels. And interestingly, instead of taking range, it just straight up goes elite marksman. So elite marksman gives you 5 range per every level. So when you're at level 2, you're actually going to get 10 range. It does increase your damage, however. So there is a interesting breakpoint where you can, with sufficient levels, you can start shooting melting points with fewer shots. All right, we got unit drop. We got Vulcan. I think Vulcan might actually be decent here for STEELSANE. As we can see on the last round, the crawlers really had no clear answers to. But then Vulcans is also susceptible to elite fortress. Tough decision. All right, it's going to be Vulcan here for STEELSANE just to cover up the gaps. And for Apuchi, it's actually going to be Farseers. Farseers are going to be put at the front. Is there going to be EM? Or is there going to be radar? Neither. Instead of just going to be a lot of beef. So it's going to be photon, which means when these melting points do lock onto this fortress, they're dealing 30% less damage, giving the fortress a chance to walk close and punch them in the face. All right, let's go look at chaff clear here. So here are some unfortunate situations with the level 2 crawlers on the line. These 2 crawlers, they will fight, and STEELSANE's crawler will lose because no units, no units from STEELSANE will actually be able to shoot through the shield bubble in that time, which means Apuchi will actually end up with more crawlers after this engagement. So very unfortunate, but something to consider when you're running into fortresses on the line and crawlers on the line. One way to fix it is just to get rid of this crawler and put it right down here in front of the Vulcan. It still serves the purpose of chaff, but it allows your Vulcan to actually clear. Alright, Vulcan gets firebomb, so everything is now on fire. However, the fortress, they're just doing so much damage, but the melting point though, still standing strong. And with that, I think this might be lethal. We still have 3 melting point left over, now 2. Top one. No, actually no, I totally missed the other one. So we still have 3 melting point left over, but with tower capture, is that enough? If STEELSANE can get to this melting point, maybe some other units, maybe he has a chance. Maybe he'll pop this Arclight for Apuchi. One. Oh, it's gonna be another round. Wow, crazy. I think EM is a must pick here, unless Apuchi wants to pick the item for his Mustang, which is also decent. But EM, just to pop the shield, is so good. Apuchi did not use oil on his side just yet, so he has the option to oil into STEELSANE's board. With EM into and oil, he might actually set his side of the board on fire. STEELSANE picked the EM just for shield popping. And I really think that, yeah, there it goes. There's some leveling on this melting point. There's a case to be made for a delayed leveling for melting point, simply because that once the melting point charges up to full, they will do a significant amount of damage anyways. But in this case, there's very little time before the opponent's fortress engage onto your melting point, and because they hit so hard, you want to get them leveled so that they can get to that max level and sometimes higher damage to bring down this fortress. So I think leveling is a good option. The EM, I guess, is decent because the melting point, they are already doing some damage to the shield. But with level 2 force, they're not able to pop them in one single barrage. So having that EM here is good. Apuchi very cleverly placed the 3rd fortress on the other side, the side that he's not expected to get EM'd on. Okay. Surprisingly, we have anti-missile devices. I wonder what the missile device is really for. It can't just be for the Farseer. I mean, there's only 2 of them, so maybe he was expecting Stormcallers on Apuchi's board. which makes sense, right? You're a very static board. You need more chaff clear at the front. But as it stands right now, I mean, this is a very favorable position. I think for STEELSANE because he's got high level melters. But the problem though is this tower. It is level 2, so he can take a bit of punishment. But I think STEELSANE's got this. This level 3 melting point really has no answer. Sure, we got 2 forts, but they're going to get disabled. They're going to walk very slowly. And by the time it finally gets to the melting point, they're going to get locked on. And, oh, one more shot. Oh my goodness. A mutually assured destruction, and Poochie stays in the game once again. That was a super close one, that fort getting that final shot out. Incendiary, I think it's just too good to ignore. Bombard is also off cooldown, so you can do like a double whammy with Incendiary, Bombard, and then maybe put oil down. So it's all very strong here. STEELSANE taking Incendiary into an aggro player. I think this is great. And Poochie taking Intensive. I think he just wants to really scale these fortresses, because the higher the level gets, the further it actually shoots. So for example, this level 4 fortress, now with range and the elite, shoots at 160 meters. And what that means is it outranges the melting point. And that's not a good thing, because melting point needs time to charge up, whereas the fortress would just pummel you down with 58,000 damage per shot, which means this fortress kills this melting point at level 3 in 3 shots. All right, fire goes down, oil goes down. At this point, STEELSANE doesn't really care where he puts those, because he has these firebomb Vulcans, so he knows everything's going to be on fire at the front line anyways. But also super curious about the AM device on the last round. I feel like if anyone that would put AM, it'd probably be a Poochie to just stop the firebomb. But no, instead it's just going to be STEELSANE. More blue boys coming down with this force, and this is where things get really tricky, because all of these units pack a huge punch, and if you're not able to clear them fast enough, they're just gonna beat you down. This is sort of the ultimate form for a fort stand play. And this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of the game. It's just that it's such an efficient late game comp, because in order for you to answer this, you need to have one heavy anti-HP units, and that's going to be these melting point. But 2 heavy anti-chaff units, which is going to be these Vulcan, and all of which you need to get leveled on and also get tacked on. And then you're also running into the case of not having enough chaff or HP for yourself. So in this case, that's exactly what's happening, right? You can see all these forts just beating down these giants, because we just don't have enough deployments to get enough chaff. Whereas for a Poochie, there's just an overwhelming amount of force. So a very, very strong game, strong performance here for a Poochie, switching from a Saber Mustang into a Fort Mustang. And one thing to note is that once your Mustangs get sufficiently high leveled, so in this case like a level 4 Mustang, it is okay to take high explosive. High explosive erases any small units on the ground without wasting your deployment. So really, like, this is a more efficient board for a Poochie than it is for STEELSANE. All right, I hope you enjoyed this game, and if you want to see another great game, here's a video for you, and I will see you on the next one.
Prepare your tactics, Mechabellum's calling. Deploy your fortress, the battlefield's alive with swarms.